We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
Hello and welcome to another Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutcheon, political editor of the Daily Record. I was going to say that I'm joined by the A-listers, but it is Mark and it's also Ben. So what do you reckon? Maybe B-listers, B minus?
Z.
I think you're talking yourself up there. So let's get cracking. Budget fallout. I mean, the last week's been dominated by stories about claims Labour have hiked taxes in order to fund a welfare splurge, that Rachel Reeves misled the public by portraying an overly gloomy state of the public finances. There have been relentless calls for Reeves to quit. I'm thinking, Mark, in terms of the Labour brand, and where Labour are just now, the main winner's probably been the SNP.
They'll seek to capitalise on this, what appears to be a budget that hasn't gone down superbly well in some quarters. However, I don't think we should allow our take on the budget to be driven by right-wing media, by those who think that tax and spend is necessarily a bad thing, who want to restrict borrowing, who want to create a neoliberal order. I think Rachel Reeves made a decent fist of the budget. And I think if the SNP were genuinely being social democratic about this, they would agree. But obviously they're going to try and side with the Tories and maybe make hay with the fact that...
There was a post-cabinet briefing yesterday. I'll just interject briefly. And I said to their spokesperson, so is the government against the freezing thresholds? Fudged it. Against the rise in dividends? Fudged it. Against the pension contribution tax? Fudged it. So the SNP are focusing on the process and the shambles leading up to the budget rather than the meat and drink of it. And
that's right. And let's face it, much of the shambles came from the Office for Budget Responsibility, which should be renamed the Office for Budget Irresponsibility, because they just seem to do what they like. I mean, they put the budget out early that day, causing chaos in the markets. Subsequently, they've tried to put the boot into Labour for their forecasts. I mean, the only blame for this budget being shambolic, I think, lies with the Office for Budget Responsibility. And if Reeves and Starmer had any sense, they would just sack the lot of them, and that would be a big saving right overnight. And as for the SNP's take on it, I think the SNP are genuinely a social democratic party. I think they've shown that in the way they've governed in Scotland. I don't think really in their heart they think that Reeves done much wrong, but they've got to try and make political hay from it.
It's like a battle for oxygen, isn't it? It's like about 5 months to go. Labour are 17 points behind. Every day is kind of crucial for them, or at least every day will be crucial for them. Pretty soon, they need to be bossing the narrative. It needs to be about the SNP government, not chaos at Westminster. And every day we're focused on Reeves and Starmer. It's just another day wasted for us, aren't we?
Well, it is. I mean, obviously, Labour, they've kind of got a foot in both camps. You've got the Labour government at Westminster, UK level, and obviously the UK media, a lot of the focus is on the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, the Prime Minister. I agree with Mark. I think a lot of the negative reaction has been about the process and did she lie? Did she? The actual meat that the policies haven't, compared to last year's omni-shambles, they've not been. I mean, you can disagree, and I do disagree with a lot of them, but they haven't been the disaster that we saw last year.
No, that's right. I think, as you say, a lot of the stuff she's done seems to be quite clever use of the levers that she has at her disposal. She's not able to raise the basic rate of tax as flagged, because that would have been a breach of the manifesto. And then you've got the Institute for Fiscal Studies saying that she did mislead the voter on that. She didn't. They're just talking through a hole in their head. She didn't lie. She kept within the promise that Labour made, and she managed to still get some money into the coffers, which isn't just going to sort of feckless benefit claimants. That money is going into investment and to try and get people out of poverty so that they can, get working, get earning, get paying tax.
2/3 of households affected by the two-child benefit cap are in work.
Exactly. So these are working people who've been plunged into poverty, and a lot of them end up not working as a result. You know what I mean? So I think Reeves deserves a lot of credit for that budget. Not a popular view, and not one that you might see expressed in many other places, but I wish the SNP were sometimes a bit more grown up about it, and I wish they were a bit more welcoming when Labour do things that are good. I think they look better as a result.
They looked miserable after the two-child cap was.
They
It was
should have
almost
been.
like their own policy and scrapping the cap wasn't based on values. It was just a political dividing line.
Well, that's it. But I don't doubt, by the way, that most people within the SNP have got the same sort of social democratic outlook that Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer have. Just after the next election at Holyrood, the pair of them might have to start working closely together, because it might be the only way that we can govern Scotland in a sort of a decent way.
I mean, I don't like talking about other newspapers, but there was a story in the Times earlier this week, which I feel compelled to raise briefly. And it was based on this idea that Scottish Labour MPs were going to mount a leadership challenge to Keir Starmer in the new year. Now, I mean, I got my own source on this. It was a Labour MP who described this as absolute and total bollocks. I'm just trying to think this through to its logical conclusion. We go to January, where there's a few months to go to the election. Labour desperately needs to have the focus on the SNP. What sense would it make to have a divisive leadership contest, which open up all sorts of wounds, where the focus is on Labour divisions? An ass would be a complete bystander in this. I think bonkers is an understatement of the
I
century.
think, though, it is important that Scottish Labour make sure voters are aware there is a division between the two, and that this might be a useful, talk of a leadership challenge and a coup. It might be a useful way of establishing, look, we do our own thing. We don't answer to Westminster. Anna Sarwar doesn't answer to Keir Starmer. He, he's his own man. Him and Jackie Bailey set their own policies, and they'll do their own thing. That's always a very damaging line of attack, the branch office. So I think it's useful to remind people that they are, in all intents and purposes, a sort of separate party within a party.
You know what would be, in order to differentiate themselves from the UK party, you know what would be a very effective way of doing it on policy? If an Assar was to say this month that if he wins, he's going to cut income tax. So you've got the contrast between the UK party freezing thresholds, people paying a bit more income tax, but he's saying, and I'm not talking about the higher rate or the top rate for millionaires.
Paul, you're coming round to my way of thinking at last. And it wouldn't be a cut. He could say, look, I'm going to bring Scotland level with the rest of the UK. And that would be a cut for us, but it wouldn't be cutting tax. It would just be bringing Scotland into line with the rest of the United Kingdom.
Put pressure on the SNP. It would also be a dividing line between Scottish and UK Labour, show that they go their own way.
Might you have the SNP and Labour going into this Holyrood election saying, well, we'll try and bring the tax take down?
This is the thing, right? So obviously the SNP have increased income tax, and we alluded to this on the last podcast. I wouldn't be surprised if the SNP are thinking in their draft budget in November, can we get away with partially reversing that income tax rise? So I kind of feel like it's who gets in first on this idea is going to own it.
They're in a difficult, because in January they've got the choice. Does Shona Robertson freeze the thresholds? And obviously the lower thresholds, it's middle income families. If she doesn't freeze the higher tax thresholds, it's portrayed as a tax cut for as the SNP have never tired of telling us, for those with the broadest shoulders and higher earners and people who I would argue aren't, well, I think they certainly wouldn't regard themselves as rich, but that would be portrayed as a tax cut for the rich. Now, are the SNP really going to do that?
Here's the thing. So we've got 6 rates of income tax in Scotland as a result of the changes made by the SNP.
Only 3 in the rest of the UK.
They could look at, say, the basic rate, which is on income between 15,398 to around 27 grand, and then the intermediate rate, which is about 27 grand to 43 grand. They could focus on those rates, maybe even just the basic rate, and just not touch the higher rates. That would be a cheaper way that probably disproportionately benefits lower and middle income voters.
Yeah, and that could be argued as a progressive tax cutting measure. And if like folk like me who are interested in making life better for poor people. That that makes total sense, and it continues to proportionately put the burden on those with the broadest shoulders. And I think people who do earn middle incomes should pay more. You know, I think that's how it should be.
But it would. There is a choice to be made.
Yeah.
So look, I'm looking here. The 42% higher rate. The higher rate starts at 43,663. I think in the rest of the UK, the higher rate is 40%, and it starts at 50 grand.
Yeah.
So if they freeze the 42, more and more people are going to be dragged into that higher rate. At 43,663.
It might be offset though by a cut to the lower rates, though.
It might be offset to a cut, yeah.
I think the key point here is that that would sort of change the dial in Scottish politics, and what's both parties are considering it. It's about who gets in first,
and who presents it as the most virtuous measure, and cutting those rates for lower earners, which benefits everyone eventually, by the way, seems to me quite a good idea. Have you raised this with your Labour pals?
I've said nothing to anyone.
Well, I hope they're listening.
Well, if Labour got in there first, I think that would turn the tables. But if they kept quiet and allowed John Swinney to do it, I think it's game over in terms of the election. If the SNP owned a basic rate tax cut, that would be that would be it.
I think though, the one thing they definitely will do is they'll have the calculators out at Butte House, and they'll be trying to figure out how to get that balance back where they can say more people pay less tax, which we now know isn't the case because the Scottish Fiscal Commission said that hasn't been the case for 2 years. They'll be trying to get this back. So there will be some form of tax cut, I think, for lower earners.
Yeah, and plus, if it comes into force in April, a few weeks before the election, and folk look at their pay packets and see they've got an extra 30 quid, they will notice that.
Yeah, that's it. Going back to your earlier point about the Labour MP who told you that the leadership challenge was
absolute and total bollocks.
Absolute and total bollocks. I had to asterisk that out with the copy, because, and also I'm amazed that any Labour politician would use such
shocking, isn't it?
I was shocked and stunned when that copy came over. I had to stick a couple of asterisks in it for our gentle readers. So I don't know who it was, but they're very naughty. I think I've got an idea, but anyway, better not reveal sources.
I'll take that to the grave.
I mean, one other tax cut, council tax freeze.
That's more divisive, I would say. I mean,
it's popular voters.
You think the SNP are preparing their council tax freeze election humdinger right now?
I think they might be.
Maybe a council tax. I reckon a council tax cap might be. Capping it at 3%, something like that.
I mean, last year we saw all these really high rises, up to 15% in some cases. And I'm sure I remember reading from multiple sources, town hall, council sources saying, look, we're going to go for a bumper rise this year because we're expecting pre-election freeze next year.
I think the best outcome for the SNP and council tax would be if SNP-led councils froze the council tax, Labour councils rose it, and that would be another stick with which to beat them. So I think you might see pressure from both John Swinney and Anas Sarwar on the respective councils, just saying, lads, well, then just keep it as low as possible.
In a wider sense, surely somebody within Scotland, I know the Scottish Parliament's not great at coming up with successful and interesting new plans. It seems to be completely devoid of any ideas. But man, surely we can have higher limits on council tax, so that if you're in a £2 million house, you didn't pay the same as somebody in a house worth 250k. Let's have no upper limit. Let's just let the folk in the big houses pay more. That would get money into the coffers.
I know. Every time John Swinney talks about austerity and how bad the funding settlement is for Westminster, he's left this council tax unreformed in every year.
Aye.
Okay, I mean there've been tweaks to it, but the fundamentals have remained the same.
And I don't even think it's that hard to put in these upper levels. There's not that many people with 2 million, 1.5 million pound houses, right? But there's a lot of money to be made off them every year for council tax services. And there's no that you're not going to get voted out of the office because you have a go at these millionaire house owners. Get them taxed to the hilt because of their massive properties. And if it's one person living in a property worth 2 million, sell it and move to somewhere cheaper.
Well, this is it. It's literally is a postcode lottery. If we went down that road, people in Edinburgh would end up paying huge council tax bills, and people in Clackmannanshire would have much. And the first thing,
dues.
Clackmannanshire could have a much bigger house, indoor swimming pool, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But because it's not worth as much as a central Edinburgh property,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure that works.
Property, there are billions and trillions of pounds in the UK caught up in property. And I don't think any party really got to grips with how we tax that, because that's where much of our wealth is stored. And because it's stored there, it just sits there. It doesn't benefit anyone apart from the people who eventually sell it.
But the wealth isn't in cash that can be paid to the council. The wealth is in the property itself.
But if the people in those big houses were taxed properly for local goods and services in relation to the value of the property, that would put a lot of money in the coffers. I think it's a perfectly civilized idea. And if rich folk don't want to pay that extra money,
So it's rumoured that the Prime Minister may at some point this week, I use my words carefully, may at some point this week be in Scotland. If he is, and if he meets in Sarwar, what should Sarwar's message to the Prime Minister be? 5 months
Tax
before
the
the
rich,
holiday.
clearly.
probably there's your train ticket back to London, Keir. Going to leave us in peace. That might be it. Or maybe he'll pay his taxi back, forget the train fare. I don't think Anna Sarwar, he'll welcome him with open arms, and they'll be hugging and laughing and smiling in front of probably children. It's always children in it doing something, or
There'll be some sort
hard
of
hat.
Yeah, I was
people.
going to say some sort of engineering yard.
Yeah, if they can find one in Scotland that hasn't been shut down, thanks to fossil fuels levies and all that. But I think poor old Anas will put on a brave face, and he'll say that Starmer's an asset to Labour, and then he'll praise the Lord that he's returned back down to London when he gets away.
I mean, he does still need the UK party and Starmer on a couple of levels. One, if you look at the budget, I think there's no doubt that when it comes to two-child cap and the £150 off bills, Anas Sarwar did have influence over that. That's what he was lobbying for behind the scenes. So the budget would have been a lot worse for Scottish Labour had he not been then at the Treasury, down in the Prime Minister's residence as well. And also, even though they're 17 points behind in the polls, I think that Labour will outspend the SNP quite comfortably.
No doubt.
And that is down to largely UK resources. I mean, the UK Labour machine is a pretty impressive thing when it is up and running.
Paid for by the trade unions, by and large.
Indeed, absolutely.
So let's see a bit more policy aimed at helping working people, rather than slagging the trade unions off, which we sometimes get.
So I think, he does still need, and he will get the support of the UK party. So that's partly why he keeps so close to the Prime Minister. But we know what the problem is. It's the last 16 months of UK government that fully explains the 17-point lead.
It does. I mean, obviously, we've discussed this before. Anna Sarwar was odds on to become the next First Minister when Starmer got his landslide, and the turnaround since then has been nothing short of disastrous for Scottish Labour. But it does seem to have slowed down. I think, we're getting towards the sharp end now, and minds are starting to focus a bit more on, let's put the UK government to one side. Who do we want to run Scotland for the next 5
Scottish
years?
services, that's Anna Sarwar needs to make a selection, not about identity, not about anything else other than service delivery by the Scottish government. And I believe there's a big report coming out tomorrow on the state of the NHS, which will be tough reading for the First Minister and the Health Secretary in Scotland. It's vital that Anna Sarwar and his team get on the front foot there and make sure that their attacks are aimed squarely on failures of service delivery. And by the way, if Anas can really get that moving, I mean, certainly the Record and other papers are very, critical of the SNP for service delivery. If he can make it about that, he's got a chance. And
it should be about the last 5 years and the vision of the future in a devolved context in the next 5. I mean, it shouldn't be a referendum on Keir Starmer. If you don't like Keir Starmer, you're going to get a chance to boot him out of office if he's still around in a few years' time. So this is not a sort of shadow Westminster election. This is about Holyrood. We fought hard for this Parliament. It's about the NHS, about schools, about council services, about tax decisions. We shouldn't sort of be conned into thinking that it's about another parliament.
And you would expect John Swinney to have stuff up his sleeve on service delivery, because although he's trying to steer it away from service delivery as the main focus of the election, the Holyrood election, he's going to have something up his sleeve on that, you would think.
The SNP have done this successfully in the past, in that they'll campaign in this election as though they are the opposition. And to themselves, and talk about what's going to change if John Swinney gets in as First Minister, and this is going to change that. And you're like, well, hang on.
It's hard to see how they could portray themselves as the change vehicle, given that they've been in power for 19 years.
That's what it'll be.
But they remain to their core, I think, a party of relatively rebellious spirits, and they want the big radical change of independence. I think they've still got that appeal to the voter. All these years of government in Scotland, but I think to the voter they still seem like a wee bit of a kick in the arse to the establishment, So they've got that going for them.
I just wonder if they might hit the skids during the campaign if it becomes clear from the opinion polls that they're not going to get close to this outright majority, because then SNP supporters will think, well, what's the point? If they're within touching distance of it, then they'll be really fired up. But if it's clear that they're in line for 52, 53 MSPs, well short of the 65 they need outright, that's bound to damage morale and motivation.
It is, although it's also going to damage morale and motivation in the opposition parties if it doesn't look as though, we're just going to get more of the same, the status quo. The SNP is the biggest party, but not a majority. That's stasis. We've been in that position for so long now,
but then you've got the whole Farage effect, though. That might juice up the election. I'm sure we'll get plenty of good headlines.
I'm told he might be visiting as well. So obviously,
Falkirk on this weekend.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Okay, just one non-election related issue. I think as we speak, there might be a statement in Holyrood on grooming gangs. I think that what's going to happen is that the government will announce an expert is going to have a review into the handling of how complaints in relation to grooming gangs were conducted. The backdrop to this story is that we've got this national inquiry into grooming gangs south of the border. The Scottish Government has not agreed to one in Scotland. They've been under huge pressure from victims of grooming gangs. We had a story about a victim called Taylor.
Yeah.
The Labour MP, Joni Reid, has been cranking up the pressure. And it seems like there's been a breakthrough in the context of this review that's going to be announced. It's not a full inquiry. That might come. But Ben, it does look like if you support an inquiry into grooming gangs in Scotland, that whatever the government is announcing today with this expert is a step in the right direction.
It's a step in the right direction. I mean, I have to say, I don't understand why we've seen with the UK COVID inquiry that public inquiries can be carried out at a UK level. I don't understand why we've got to have two inquiries into the same issue. I mean, we know from one of the other victims who's was brought from Bradford to Glasgow and fell prey to a grooming gang. These criminal networks don't stop at the border. So why a separate inquiry? I mean, it's just another inquiry.
Maybe because criminal justice has devolved.
Well, I know, but surely the UK inquiry can maybe have a section on Scotland. I'm sure legal minds can get their heads around the fact that there's two legal systems.
That might be possible, but it never happens. So
it doesn't.
We are where we are, and it's quite clear from. I mean, your story about Taylor was a tough read, but a necessary and vital read. And it's clearly, and Joni Reid, the Labour politician who's been leading the charge for an inquiry, she's been very strong in it as well. It's quite clear that there was a problem in Scotland, equal to, possibly, but certainly on a par with the stuff that was happening in northern cities in England. I think that you didn't want a full-scale 10-year inquiry that's going to cost a fortune and enrich all the lawyers. But certainly some sort of look back at how victims were ignored possibly and had their complaints sidelined. I think your story with Taylor indicated quite strongly that she wasn't really listened to at the time. That needs looked at in some way, hopefully quickly, hopefully without great expense. But I think you can get to the truth of this matter pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's quite a simple, and it needs someone who's brave enough to say it. Look, a lot of these concerns, same as in Rotherham, same as in Rochdale, weren't looked at properly because of a fear of being seen as racist.
Mm.
That's what someone needs to look at, and I'm convinced that happened in Scotland, and that's the crux of it. It's not that these gangs existed. It's not that victims were raped and victimized. It's that the authorities chose to look the other way for fear of being seen as racist. We know that happened in Rotherham. We know that happened in Rochdale. What we need to know is, did it happen here?
There's also I think though, as well as the racial element, which clearly seems to be part of it, did the police in Scotland ignore the concerns of just girls from housing estates who are not from rich families, who are maybe from vulnerable families, and they in many cases they fell prey to grooming gangs who are very white, So it could well be that poor people were ignored, regardless of the ethnicity of the abuser. But you're right, both of these things they looked at were vulnerable young kids ignored, and was the nature of the abuser themselves a contributor to these things being ignored. It's going to be, I mean, it needs to be sorted.
Another aspect is that the campaigners wanted this review to be carried out independently of the police, because there was a feeling like the police, if not covered it up, but certainly didn't do enough to take people's concerns seriously. I think the case of Taylor, she wasn't even spoken to by the police. So if, as the reports suggest, it's going to be carried out by Professor Alexis Jay, who is a renowned expert in this area, I think that will strengthen confidence in this review.
Yeah.
What one other thing, and again, this is kind of a much bigger point, but it's something that's been discussed time and time again and never seems to actually, we never get any further, is the separation of the roles of the Lord Advocate, who is the head of the prosecution service and the Scottish Government minister. And, a lot of these cases the police investigated went to the Crown. Prosecution reports went to the Crown. The Crown need to explain why there's never been a group-based grooming gang trial in Scotland until the Dundee one recently, because the police passed these reports over. Was there a political concern? And
also Scottish exceptionalism, this sort of feeling like we're different in this country, that bad things couldn't possibly happen in Scotland. Is that part of it too?
I mean, what's clear is that young, vulnerable, working class people get ignored right across the country, always have, and that doesn't stop at Berwick.
All right, that's great. Thanks very much to Mark and to Ben for joining me, and thanks also to Angus from the Daily Record video team who produced this episode. You can listen to Planet Holyrood on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or watch it on the Daily Record YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok for the latest news and the best bits of the podcast.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.